What if I told you that a simple barrel of whiskey once sparked rebellion, divided a nation, and shaped the very politics of America? This isn't a tale of kings or generals. It's the story of spirits, taxes, and power. Whiskey wasn't just a drink, it was an economic lifeline. Settlers in the 18th century, especially in Pennsylvania and the western frontier, had little access to currency. Corn was abundant, but carrying bushels of grain over rough roads was impractical. Enter whiskey, liquid gold that could be traded, taxed, and transported easily. Farmers turned their surplus corn into whiskey, not only to survive, but to prosper. It became more than alcohol. It became money, power, and influence. The drink would later become a symbol of frontier independence, a cultural emblem, and eventually, a political headache for the new United States. In 1791, the newly formed U.S. government faced massive debts from the Revolutionary War. Alexander Hamilton proposed an excise tax on whiskey. For small farmers, this was outrageous. Imagine producing a barrel of whiskey for trade and suddenly being forced to pay a hefty tax to a distant government. This wasn't just about money, it was about control. Whiskey became a symbol of resistance. Farmers in western Pennsylvania began organizing protests, refusing to pay, and intimidating tax collectors. The whiskey excise tax planted the seeds of what would become one of the first major domestic challenges for the fledgling American government. By 1794, protests escalated into outright rebellion. Farmers attacked tax collectors, burned homes, and mobilized armed groups. Washington's government faced a test. Could it enforce law and order without descending into tyranny? President George Washington made an unprecedented move. He personally led a militia of 13,000 men to quell the rebellion. The show of force ended the uprising with minimal bloodshed, but the message was clear. The federal government was here to stay. Whiskey, once a symbol of independence, had become a political tool, a test of power and governance. The aftermath of the rebellion split the political landscape. Thomas Jefferson and his Democratic Republicans sympathized with the farmers, arguing that Hamilton and the Federalists had overstepped. Whiskey became a wedge issue, shaping debates about federalism, taxation, and individual rights. In taverns and parlors, Americans debated: should the government have the power to tax and control private industry? Or should local communities maintain their autonomy? Whiskey wasn't just a drink anymore. It was a political litmus test. As decades passed, whiskey remained a political tool. During elections, candidates used it to sway voters, literally. Campaigns offered whiskey at rallies, and distilleries became hubs of local political activity. By the 19th century, whiskey had cemented itself as both a cultural staple and a political weapon, influencing elections and legislation alike. Even national debates over temperance and prohibition were tied to the legacy of whiskey. From rebellion to electioneering, the drink never lost its power to move hearts and votes. Whiskey's story is ultimately a story of America itself. It shaped the frontier, tested the government, divided parties, and influenced elections. The legacy lives on in cultural icons, songs, festivals, and even cocktails named after historical events. Imagine raising a glass to a drink that once sparked rebellion, swayed politics, and symbolized the tension between freedom and authority. Whiskey reminds us that history is not only made in the halls of power, but also in the hands of ordinary people. From cornfields to Congress, whiskey shaped the young nation in unexpected ways. It was more than alcohol. It was money, power, protest, and politics. The next time you sip whiskey, remember, each drop carries centuries of rebellion, debate, and cultural evolution. History often flows like whiskey, strong, complex, and occasionally dangerous. Understanding its story helps us see the forces that shaped the America we know today.